As I talked with so many women and heard the stories of...
You might hear another story.
Kind of put myself out there more.
You can never be too humble or too grateful.
And then to become an agent of change. And I think that's something that we've
They
seen.
sought to free their mothers, their daughters.
What they're getting isn't a form of charity. It's an opportunity to work hard.
There's a whole sense of building a community.
My first encounter with returning slaves was on July 4th, 2001. And as I talked with so many women and heard the stories of unconscionable abuse they had experienced and had survived, I was convinced that I had traveled 6,000 miles and had left the land of the free and arrived in the home of the brave.
Wrote one line in that article: her daughter Anesi isn't going to school. She dropped out of the 8th grade, but her older son, Silfred, is continuing at the 11th grade. So I had no idea what that line was going to do, you know, how that line was going to impact my life.
Law had changed the idea that women could be in the military. This was still something that was very much a new idea to the men who were in the military.
Hi, I'm Divya. I'm a junior, and I identify myself as a Hindu.
My name is Saima. I identify as a Muslim.
My name is Sophia. I have studied Christian Science. I feel like there's a lot of miscommunication when it comes to religion, especially when you have a different interpretation of your religion.
Before the genocide in Darfur and Western Sudan, there were comparable atrocities in southern Sudan and Nuba Mountains, all of which were facilitated by the current government of Sudan. Especially during the latter conflicts, oftentimes untold numbers of women and children were captured from their villages in the south and then taken to villages in the north where they were sold into slavery. Subsequently, southern Sudanese developed what was a very elaborate underground railroad. Reminds you somewhat of the Underground Railroad that was familiar to us in American history, in which they sought to free their mothers, their daughters, their sisters, their friends, and their children. I felt led to return to Sudan to understand better how I might possibly address this issue. And with that trip, I was stretched way beyond my zone of comfort and found myself sometimes drowning deep in a sea of faith. I felt overwhelmed by the stories that I heard from individuals that I encountered. I cried with a woman who, when she was taken from her village, had 2 small toddlers. She begged to carry her toddlers rather than being forced to take the loot from the village, and said that she was concerned that her toddlers would not survive if she just left them. And so the raiders shot her 2 toddlers and taunted her by saying, "Problem solved." Again, I felt utterly overwhelmed, and in that moment had a conversation with God in which I made it very clear that I did not have the right stuff to address this plight, and therefore God should simply beam me up. But I then engaged in a conversation in which God reminded me that as a well-educated, highly favored African-American woman, that I did not come from generations of previous slaves and long line of Black descendants who ever had the luxury of giving up in the face of injustice.
The experience of a lifetime to get paired with a phenomenal editor who had this great story idea, which was, let's explore what does it actually look like to live on $1 a day. It's really incomprehensible, and we're talking about, you know, so many of the world's people living under the international poverty line. Malawi being a good country to study because half of the people there are living in poverty, according to that measure. So I went out to the village, and I went hunting down Selena Boniface, who was the uneducated but very dynamic female leader of one of the groups that I'd been studying. And just in the way of getting to know her, I got to know her family, including a couple of her children who are around. And I wrote one line in that article: her daughter, Anesi, isn't going to school. She dropped out of the 8th grade, but her older son, Silfrid, is continuing at the 11th grade. So I had no idea what that line was going to do, how that line was going to impact my life. Christian Science Monitor readers have picked up on this article, and it's really struck a chord. And they want to know, what about this Anesi girl? What's going on there? Why isn't she going to school? Why is her brother going to school? And furthermore, what can we do to help? We want to do something, and we want you to do something.
I think that as a Hindu, I have different beliefs and decisions I would make than from my peers. So it conflicts with the society, and I think that's a challenge I face every day.
I think that the biggest conflict that I probably have faced when it comes to religion would just be the perspective that, some people have of Islam isn't necessarily what it is. And I feel like there's a great deal of miscommunication as to what Islam was actually built from, like the 7 pillars and things like that.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of miscommunication when it comes to religion, especially when you have a different interpretation of your religion than others would seem to agree with. Like, you might have a controversial point of view, which sometimes I feel like I do have a different point of view than some Christian scientists, and that has been a challenge for me. But what I always get to come back to is that no matter what religion that I am, no matter what religion anybody is, there's something that connects us all. I've been recently starting to call it that one incredible law.
Bring us back, Janet, to 1976 and what it all meant back then to be a woman in military ministry.
Where the law had changed the idea that women could be in the military, this was still something that was very much a new idea to the men who were in the military. And I've often used the metaphor that I felt like we had that honor of being part of a birth of a new idea, and that it maybe was unrealistic to think that there wouldn't be some labor pains with it. And where women were being integrated into other branches, I think people realized, well, this is my opinion that you should be here or you shouldn't be here, and then somebody else realized it was just their opposing a human opinion. It took on a very different edge in the chaplaincy, because for many people, what we would hear from male chaplains was, God told me you shouldn't be here. So it was a bit different feel of that. We were coming out of a big meeting, and a young man came up to me, and he looked at, we were in a very dress uniform, and so you were wearing all of your awards, and he didn't know my story. He didn't know what amazing things had happened at my first 2 assignments, and how I had been involved at some very high-ranking levels to institute installation-wide programs or something new in the military. And he could not understand why he was seeing such high-ranking awards on my jacket. And he came up to me, and I think it was just more an emotional reaction on his part. He looked at me and he said, "You can't have possibly deserved those awards," and he spit on me. Now, I don't know, I'm always shocked at how many people, when you say how many people in the room have been spit on you, and you have a whole bunch of people raise their hand. But I've always said the first time is the hardest. For me, it was probably, the way I describe it is, it's a very disgusting feeling to have somebody spit on you physically. And my reaction to it was a lot like a gas grill lighting up. And it was just, whoa, it was just so disgusting. And I was very concerned what I might do. And we didn't even know each other's names hardly, other than we had a name tag on. And so I really had to turn to God so quickly. And a thought from the Christian Science textbook came to me. Mary Baker Eddy stated, "If you do not handle evil in the very first instance, it will handle you in the second."
do to help? We want to do something, and we want you to do something. What the Monitor ended up doing was to create a fund where readers could send that money in and know that it would be safe and a secure process. Then that money came over to Malawi, and some volunteers that I knew from Care Malawi said, okay, we're going to make this happen. So even after I left, they were going to be going back and forth and helping these girls to get the tuition to go to the community school, which was an hour's walk from their village. And so that was the beginning. So the Monitor published an update and an op-ed just explaining all the issues about education in Malawi. And readers sent in money, and they said, "Okay, we're going to be a part of this. We're in this now." So they saw the picture of those girls in their Sunday best, and they said, "Okay, these are our girls." So I went back to Fletcher and I sent out an email, and that's when the other aspect of this, just network of people and channel of feeling around this issue came in, because I heard back from a number of people, and with those people, that's really how AGE started. Then we applied for and received a grant from Tufts to go down to Malawi at the end of the year and just evaluate what was happening, how everything had gone with our volunteers and with those girls through the year. And what we found was, this is good, what we've done is good, but we need to do more. This community school down the road, it's not what we think the Monitor readers want for these girls, because there's 100 kids in a classroom. The girls are renting a room. They're not in the kind of environment that we want to see them in. And they need more support. So we committed to raising more funds for each girl and to getting them into boarding schools. And that was an important step for us. There they can be supervised. They don't have to go back and forth down the road every weekend where things can happen. And then over the years, we've been able to build up a program that meets some of the other challenges that they face. So they go from being in a primary school speaking English, speaking Chichewa, which is their mother tongue, to going to secondary school, they have to speak in English. And they're with girls from more advantaged backgrounds in these now boarding schools that we're putting them in. There are people with advantages, and there are people that don't have as many advantages. And we're trying to address some of that in Malawi by helping some of these girls with the awareness that the disadvantaged girls have basically no shot of making it up through the secondary system on their own. And even if they did, their chances of passing those exams are just very, very slim. So that is the central issue that we're trying to address. There's a change that happens within the person with the realization that there is a way to conquer what's happening here and then to become an agent of change. And I think that's something that we've seen where these girls start to realize that what they're getting isn't a form of charity, it's an opportunity to work hard.
If you do not handle evil in the very first instance, it will handle you in the second. But the way I heard it, because of the urgency of what I was feeling, was, if you don't handle this in the first instant, I knew I needed to get my heart and my head in control. And so I just turned to God with all my heart. And the thought that came to me was, the soldiers spit on Jesus. And pretty much at that, it pretty much quenched that sense of inflammation that I was feeling. The second thought that came to me was, when you said you wanted to follow me, did you think I meant only in the easy footsteps? Which was, any of these experiences will humble you. I love Mary Baker Eddy said that you can never be too humble or too grateful. And that's what I feel like this experience helped me to understand, is those are two things. If you want to be in the ministry and you want to be a part of bringing peace and ministry to people's hearts, you have to know what it's like to love mankind despite what's going on. And it was so interesting because it was just as if where all that fiery sense of anger or disgust or whatever had been so completely quenched, then my heart turned in a totally different direction, and the thought came, what must a man have been through in order to bring himself to spit on another human being? And I found myself just reaching out and putting my arms around him and saying that to him. And I think because for him it had just been an emotional reaction, when I said that to him, it was like you could see it hitting him like a brick in the face what he had done. And he felt to his knees and he began to beg me to forgive him. And I said, well, of course I would forgive you.
I did not come from generations of previous slaves and long line of black descendants who ever had the luxury of giving up in the face of injustice. I, for the first time, saw myself through a different set of eyes, as a vision that wasn't lynched, and as a promise that refused to be silenced. And so I did not have the option to throw up my hands and recoil back into my own safety zone. I came back and joined 3 other women. Most of us are African American, and founding My Sister's Keeper. We now have 3 projects. We just completed the construction of a 525 girl primary school in South Sudan. And I can't begin to tell you how excited we were to see the girls in their new uniforms, sitting at their new desks in their new school. That project also houses our second project, which is a women's literacy project, primarily comprised of mothers, 200 mothers and a few good men, who recognized that they could better serve their daughters if they too were well educated. And then our third project is our advocacy project called Sisterhood for Peace, in which we support the growth of a network of diverse Sudanese women who are committed to collaborating across traditional boundaries of race and religion, geography and ethnicity, all of which have fueled Sudan's genocidal wars, to advocate for peace throughout all of Sudan. I have a little friend named Elizabeth who we met about 3.5 years ago, and the school that we just built was started in 2003. And so Elizabeth, like I said, we met about 3.5 years ago, and she was very, very quiet and shy. I relate to that because I struggle in a similar way. And I often ask children when I go into the schools, what do you want to be? And everybody wants to be a doctor. And anyway, so she said, like most girls do, she wanted to be a doctor, but she kind of whispered, she said, I want to be a doctor. And so I said to her, well, from now on, because people call me Dr. Gloria, we're going to call you Dr. Elizabeth. And so then I said to her, so what is your name? And she said, Dr. Elizabeth. And then I turned to the other girls and I said, so what is her name? And they yelled, Dr. Elizabeth! Well, now when we go back, Dr. Elizabeth practically runs the school. And what the headmaster said to us was that moment was a real turning point for Elizabeth, who was really always sought the back of the line, the corner, whatever. And now she's large and in charge. And what it says is more than anything, it's about speaking promise into the life of, in this case, a young woman.
You were moderator today for the panel here at the Mary Baker Eddy Library. What were your impressions? Was there anything surprising that came out of the panel discussion for you when you think about it?
It was actually quite interesting about what Sophia said about how she really thought like love was the main thing, that was her identity.
No matter what religion that I am, no matter what religion anybody is, there's something that connects us all. I've been recently starting to call it that one incredible law, and it seems to be related to love. It's something that everybody is taught when they're little, that, you know, love and compassion, those sorts of things are the good things, and you follow that. And it connects us in the world. That love, you just see it everywhere. You see that everybody can recognize it. And I think that's helped me overcome some of the difficulties.